Clara slammed the documents on his kitchen table so hard the coffee cup rattled. "Your name is on every single one of these transfers, Mr. Mercer. $11,000. That is what they say you helped steal." Caleb stared at the papers. His own signature, clean, confident, nothing like his actual handwriting, stared back at him from 7 different pages. "I have never seen these documents in my life," he said. His voice was low, dangerous, quiet. "And I have never written that signature." Clara looked at him. Then someone built this entire case, using a man they were counting on to stay silent. Caleb picked up the pages. They miscounted. If this kind of story speaks to your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow Clara and Caleb's story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. Caleb Mercer had not spoken more than 40 words in a single day for the better part of 3 years. He knew this because he had started counting the way a man counts things when the silence gets so heavy it starts pressing down on his chest like a stone. 40 words on a good day. Feed the horses, check the fence line, boil the coffee, talk to no one, sleep without dreaming if God was willing. 16 years had passed since Sarah died. 16 years since the ranch stopped being a home and became something closer to a place a man goes to wait without knowing what he's waiting for. He hadn't planned it that way. Nobody plans grief. It just moves in one morning and never leaves, takes up the chair across the table, sleeps on the other side of the bed, follows you out to the barn, and stands in the corner watching while you work. He was 51 years old. His hands were rough as saddle leather. His jaw carried 2 days of gray stubble most mornings because shaving felt like effort spent on something that didn't matter. He wasn't a man who felt sorry for himself. He was clear-eyed about that. He had just stopped requiring much. The land asked things of him, and he gave them. That was enough. That had been enough. Until the morning Clara Whitfield walked through his gate holding a letter with his name on it. He had seen her coming up the road from the kitchen window, and his first thought was that she was lost. People got lost out here sometimes. City people mostly, who underestimated how far the mountains pushed back civilization. He had gone outside to tell her the nearest town was 14 miles east, and that she'd need to double back to the fork in the road. He had not expected her to say his name. He had not expected the letter. He stood on his porch and looked at it, and something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with the September air. His name. His address. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, someone who had taken time with it, someone who wanted it to look right. But he had never written that letter. He had never contacted any agency. He had never, not once in 16 years, considered replacing what he had lost. "Where did you get this?" he said. Clara's chin lifted just slightly. She was exhausted, he could see that plainly. The kind of exhausted that lives deeper than sleep can fix. But there was something steady underneath it, something that hadn't broken yet despite everything that had clearly tried. "It was sent to me," she said, 3 weeks ago, from a placement agency in Denver. They told me a rancher in the Utah mountains had submitted an application and selected my profile." She paused. "They told me you were expecting me." "I wasn't," Caleb said. "I can see that." Neither of them spoke for a moment. "How far did you travel?" he finally asked. "Chicago," she said. "By train to Salt Lake, then a hired wagon to the valley. Then I walked the last 4 miles because the driver said this was as far as his route went." 4 miles. He looked at her boots. They weren't made for 4 miles on a mountain road. "You walked 4 miles in those." "I walked 4 miles in these," she confirmed, and there was no complaint in her voice, just the simple statement of a fact she had already made peace with. Caleb looked at the letter again, looked at his name, looked at the woman standing at his gate with nothing but a battered traveling case and the kind of stillness that comes from having already survived the worst of something. "Come inside," he said. "I'll make coffee." He didn't know why he said it. He told himself it was because she looked like she might fall down if she stood still much longer, and he didn't want to deal with that. He told himself it was the decent thing. He told himself a lot of things walking back into that kitchen, none of which were entirely honest. She sat at his table, and he put the coffee on, and he felt the wrongness of it sharply. Another person in that kitchen, in that specific chair, the sound of someone else breathing in a room that had been silent so long, the silence had become its own kind of furniture. "Someone sent that letter in my name," he said, not turning around. "I need you to understand that clearly. I did not submit any application. I did not contact any agency. Whatever you were told, it was not the truth. I understand that now," she said. "Then you understand that your situation is difficult," she said. "Yes, I understand that too." He turned then because her voice had changed on that word. Just slightly. Just enough that he caught it. She was looking at her hands where they were folded on the table, and something had moved across her face and left quickly, the way a person shuts a door fast when they don't want anyone seeing what's inside the room. "How much money do you have?" he asked. Direct. He'd never been a man for circling. She looked up. "Enough for a meal, not enough for a train ticket back. Back to Chicago." Something shifted in her expression. "I can't go back to Chicago." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Why not?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because the man I left there will be looking for me." Caleb set both hands flat on the table. "What kind of man?" "The kind," she said carefully, "who is used to owning things, and who doesn't accept that something he considers his has left." The coffee started to boil. He got up, poured 2 cups, set one in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it immediately, and he noticed that the way she held on to the warmth of it like it mattered. "His name," Caleb said. She hesitated. "Victor Garrett." Victor? The name meant nothing to him. But the way she said it meant everything. Like a name you say quietly, because saying it too loud might summon something. "And this agency," Caleb said, "the one that sent you here, you think Garrett had something to do with it?" It wasn't quite a question. Clara looked at him. And for the first time since she'd walked through his gate, something changed in her expression. Not relief exactly, but the recognition that the man across the table was not slow. "I didn't at first," she said. "I thought it was a coincidence. A clerical error. The wrong letter to the wrong woman. But when I got off the train in Salt Lake, and I saw one of Garrett's men on the platform." She stopped. "He saw you?" Caleb asked. "He didn't see me see him," she said. "I kept walking. I found the first wagon heading toward the valley, and I got on it, and I didn't stop until I ran out of road." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. He turned his cup slowly in his hands, the way he did when he was thinking something through that he didn't want to rush. "So either this letter was sent to draw you out of Chicago," he said, "or it was sent to direct you somewhere specific." "Somewhere isolated," Clara said quietly. The word landed in the kitchen and sat there. Caleb looked at her. She looked at him, and in that look passed something neither of them put into words. The understanding that she had walked directly into whatever this was, and that the nearest law was 14 miles down a mountain road, and that whoever had planned this had planned it, knowing both of those things. "You're going to stay here tonight," he said. "I'm not asking for—" "I know you're not asking," he said. "I'm telling you. You'll take the room at the end of the hall. There's a lock on the door. In the morning, we'll figure out what comes next." He stood up. "You hungry?" She looked at him for a moment like she was trying to calculate something, whether to trust the offer, whether the offer was what it appeared to be. Then something in her settled. "Yes," she said. "I am." He made her eggs and bread, and she ate without speaking, and he respected that, because a person who eats without making conversation is a person who needed the food more than they needed to perform gratitude. When she was done, she set the fork down and said, "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." "Caleb," he said. She nodded once. "Thank you, Caleb." He showed her to the room. The lock was there, solid and real. He pointed it out without comment. She understood without comment. He went back to the kitchen and stood at the window with the cold coffee and looked out at his land and tried to work out what in the devil was happening on it. Someone had used his name. Someone had forged his signature on a letter sent to a placement agency in Denver. Someone had found a woman named Clara Whitfield in Chicago, put her on a train, and aimed her at his ranch. Why? He turned the question over for a long time. It didn't open. He went to bed but didn't sleep much. He lay on his back and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his house, the creak of a floorboard, the slight sound of a door, then silence. The silence felt different now. It was the same silence, but something had moved inside it. Something had changed its shape. He didn't like admitting that. He got up before light and started coffee, and was halfway through his morning chores when he heard the back door open and found Clara standing in the yard with her arms crossed against the cold, watching him work. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. She didn't go back inside. After a moment, he handed her a spare pair of work gloves from the fence post. She took them without a word and fell into step beside him, and he showed her what needed doing without being asked whether she knew how. She figured things out as she went. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She didn't make noise about things being hard. He found himself 2 hours in the unfamiliar position of working beside someone who was just useful. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. By mid-morning they were back inside, and she was washing the breakfast things, and he was at the table with the letter again, reading it a fourth time, like something new might appear in it. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Something I missed," he said. She dried her hands and came to look over his shoulder. He was aware of her nearness in a way that felt disproportionate, just the fact of another person standing close enough that he could hear her breathe. "There," she said, and pointed. A small notation in the lower left corner of the letter. A case number, printed small, almost ornamental. "That's not standard agency formatting," she said. "I've seen enough business correspondence to know. That notation was added by someone who wasn't the agency." Caleb looked at it. She was right. "You know document formatting." "I worked as a legal secretary for 4 years, she said. "Before Garrett." She paused. "I know what a forged addendum looks like, and that's one. That case number," she said, "was added to this document after it was printed. Different ink weight, different pressure. Someone wanted this letter traceable. Traceable back to you." The room went very quiet. "They're setting me up for something," Caleb said. It wasn't a question this time either. "Or they're setting me up," Clara said, "and using you as the address." He looked at her. She looked at him. And for the second time in less than a day, that particular silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable exactly, but full. Full of things neither of them was ready to say. "I'm going to ride into town," he said. "Talk to the sheriff. I want this letter documented before anything else happens." "Do you trust the sheriff?" she asked. He started to say yes automatically, then caught himself. "He's a fair man," he said. "He's also a man who hears what people tell him, and if Garrett or anyone connected to him has already been in Millhaven, then someone may have already told him a story," Clara finished. "You think that's likely?" "I think," she said slowly, "that Victor Garrett has never arrived anywhere unprepared. And I think if he sent me here he had a reason, which means he has a plan. Which means he is already several steps ahead of wherever we're standing right now." Caleb looked at this woman, this stranger who had walked 4 miles up a mountain road in bad boots, eaten his eggs, worked his yard without complaint, identified a forged document, notation with a trained eye, and was now sitting at his kitchen table, talking through a situation most people would have fallen apart inside of. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Curiosity. Genuine, sharp, alive curiosity. About who she was. About how she'd gotten here. About what she'd survived to be this steady. He pushed it down. This wasn't the time for that. "Stay inside," he said, standing up. "Keep the door locked. Don't answer if anyone knocks." "And if they don't knock," she said. He stopped, looked at her. "If someone comes through the door without knocking," she said, "is there anything in this house I can use?" He went to the cabinet beside the fireplace and came back with a short-handled rifle and set it on the table in front of her. You know how to use one of these." She picked it up, checked the chamber with clean, practiced efficiency, and set it back down. "My father was a hunting man," she said. "He believed his daughters should be able to protect themselves." "Smart man," Caleb said. "He was," she said, and the quietness in those two words told him her father was gone, and that it was a wound she had learned to carry without letting it show. He rode to town. He was back in 2 hours, and the look on his face when he came through the door told her before he said anything that it had not gone the way he'd hoped. She was at the table where he'd left her the rifle within reach, a cup of cold coffee at her elbow, and she watched him hang his coat and take his hat off and set both hands on the back of the chair before he spoke. "The sheriff has already received a report," he said. Clara went very still. "From a representative of a Mr. Victor Garrett out of Chicago. Filed 2 days ago." Caleb's voice was level, but she could hear the controlled anger underneath it, the kind of anger a careful man carries without letting it show on his face. "The report states that you are wanted in Illinois for the theft of business funds amounting to approximately $11,000, and that you fled Chicago 3 weeks ago to avoid prosecution." Clara did not speak. She was looking at her hands. "The representative also stated," Caleb continued, "that there is reason to believe you had made contact with a man in Utah, a Caleb Mercer, and that this man may have been an accomplice in facilitating your flight from the law." The word accomplice sat in the kitchen between them like something with weight. "He moved first," Clara said quietly. "I should have expected it. He always moves first." "Look at me," Caleb said. She looked up. "Did you take the money?" he said. She held his gaze. Steady. Clear-eyed. The way a person looks at someone when the truth is all they have left and they know it. "No," she said. "Not 1 cent." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled the chair out and sat down. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out." She did. She told him about Chicago, about the law firm where she worked, about Victor Garrett, a man of money and influence who had presented himself as a client and gradually made himself something else entirely, something that wore the shape of a protector but functioned like a cage. She told him about the documents she had started to notice irregularities in client accounts transfers. She hadn't authorized signatures that weren't right. She told him about the moment she understood that Garrett had been using the firm to move money that wasn't his, and that her name had been appearing on documents she had never seen. He was building a record, Caleb said. He was building an exit, she said, his own exit, with my name on the door. She told him about the night she found the file, about the copy she had made, about the 3 blocks she had run before she'd let herself slow down, because she'd known that if Garrett found out she'd found the file, she had maybe hours before his version of events became the only version anyone in Chicago would hear. "You have the copy," Caleb said. "I have it," she said. "It's in my traveling case." He sat back. He let out a long, slow breath. "And you didn't go to the police?" "I went to a lawyer," she said. He had Garrett's name on the wall of his office in a framed letter of commendation. "So you ran?" "I ran," she said. Caleb looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at the table. Then he looked at her. $11,000 is a significant accusation, he said. It's significant enough that a small-town sheriff in Utah doesn't push back on it without good reason. And right now, the only thing I have to offer him as good reason is you sitting in my kitchen saying you didn't do it." "I know," she said. "That's not nothing," he said, "but it's not enough." "I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she hadn't expected. Something that shifted the whole weight of the conversation in a single sentence. "Then we need to make it enough," he said. "Before Garrett's man comes back with something more official than a report. Because once there's a warrant in front of the sheriff, my opinion of you stops mattering legally, and you will have a great deal less room to fight back from." She stared at him. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "No," he said. "I don't." He picked up the letter with his forged name on it and set it carefully on the table between them. "But someone used my name to pull you here, And I don't know yet whether that was meant to hurt you, or to hurt me, or both. And until I do, I'm not handing you to anyone." He paused. "That's not charity. That's practical." "That's not entirely practical," she said. He met her eyes. And for just a moment, something moved in his, something that hadn't surfaced in a long time. Something he didn't have a name for anymore. Something that lived in the part of him he had closed off and stopped visiting. He looked away first. "Get the file," he said. "Let's see what we're working with." She went to her traveling case and came back with a folded envelope, and when she spread the documents on the table between them, Caleb Mercer, a man who had not needed anything or anyone in 16 years, looked at what someone had done to this woman's life and felt something harden in his chest that was not grief. It was the other thing. The older thing. The thing that had gotten him through every hard winter and every broken fence line and every loss that should have stopped him but hadn't. It was the refusal to let something wrong stand uncorrected. "All right," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." And somewhere 14 miles down the mountain road, in the only hotel in Millhaven, Utah, a man in a city suit was sitting at a desk writing a telegram. His name was Dutch Calloway. He worked for Victor Garrett. And the telegram he was writing said that the woman had been found and that the rancher was already protecting her exactly as planned. He sealed the telegram with the careful hands of a man who had delivered bad news many times before and had learned to make it look like routine. Then he walked to the telegraph office and sent it and went back to his hotel room to wait. He had done this before. He knew how it ended. He was very wrong about that. The document spread across Caleb's kitchen table told a story that made his jaw tighten the longer he read. Clara had not exaggerated. If anything, she had undersold it. The papers in that envelope, account ledgers, transfer authorizations, correspondence on firm letterhead, painted a picture of a man who had spent at least 3 years building a financial architecture designed to collapse on someone else. And that someone else was Clara Whitfield, whose name appeared on 11 separate documents she had never signed. Authorizing transfers she had never made in amounts that added up to just over $14,000. He told the sheriff 11, Caleb said. He told the sheriff a conservative number, Clara said. The real number is worse. He's keeping the difference between what he stole and what he's accusing me of as his own personal margin. Caleb set the last page down. How long did it take you to understand what you were looking at? 2 nights, she said. I took the files home on a Friday. I didn't sleep. By Sunday morning I knew. She paused. By Sunday afternoon I was on a train. And Garrett didn't know you had the copies. Not immediately. She folded her hands on the table. He knew I had seen something. I was not careful enough about my face when I came back to the office Monday morning. I thought I had 1 more day before he'd move on the accounts. I was wrong by about 4 hours. What happened at the office? He called me into his private room, she said. Just the 2 of us. He sat behind his desk and he looked at me the way a man looks at a card he's already decided to play, and he said, Clara, I hope you haven't done anything that would complicate our arrangement. She stopped. I said I didn't know what he meant. He smiled. That was the moment I knew I had maybe 20 minutes to get out of that building before his version of reality became the only one that existed. You ran from the office directly. I walked, she said. Running draws attention. I walked to my desk, collected my coat, said good afternoon to the receptionist by name, and walked out the front door. Then I ran. Caleb looked at her. There was something in the way she told it, no dramatics, no self-pity, just the clean recitation of facts that told him she had survived by being smarter than the situation expected her to be. She had not panicked. She had performed calm until she could afford to stop performing it. The letter from Denver arrived 3 days later, she said, at the boarding house where I was staying under a different name. Nobody knew that address. Nobody. She said the last word with a particular quietness, which means Garrett found me inside of 72 hours. And instead of sending someone to take me back, he sent me a letter pointing me toward Utah. Because taking you back would have been a fight, Caleb said. Because taking me back meant I might have time to show someone those documents, she said. Sending me here meant he could get ahead of the story. File the report with the local sheriff before I ever arrived. Set the frame before I was even in the picture. Caleb stood up and went to the window. Not to look at anything. Just to move because the shape of what she was describing was making the kitchen feel too small. He needed you out of Chicago, he said. Away from anyone who might believe you. Isolated. Discredited. He turned. And he needed me. Yes, she said. Why me specifically? Clara was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, she said. That's the piece I can't place. You're not connected to Garrett. You're not connected to Chicago. You're a rancher in the Utah mountains who's been off the social record for 16 years. She paused. That's either irrelevant or it's the whole point. Caleb thought about that. About what a man like Garrett would want with a man like him. A man with land. With no family, no connections, no one to ask questions on his behalf. A man whose signature on a forged letter would raise no flags because there was no one around who knew his handwriting. The isolation he had built to protect himself from the world had just been used as a weapon against him. I need to send a wire, he said. To Denver. To the agency that processed that letter. They'll deny everything, Clara said immediately. Garrett will have already reached them. Maybe, Caleb said, but a denial on record is still a record. And if we can get the original submission document, the application filed in my name, there may be something on it that Garrett didn't think to scrub. He picked up his hat. I'm going back into town. You went this morning, she said, and I'm going again this afternoon. He stopped at the door. I need you to write down everything, every date, every name, every amount on those documents, in your own hand, with your signature, a sworn statement. He looked at her. Can you do that? Yes, she said. Good, he said. And Clara. He hesitated, which was not a thing he did often. Stay away from the windows. He rode hard to Millhaven and went straight past the sheriff's office to the telegraph station and sent 2 wires, one to the placement agency in Denver, requesting the original application file for the case number on the forged letter, and one to a land attorney in Salt Lake City named Owen Briggs, whom he had used exactly once 8 years ago, and who had struck him as the kind of man who didn't bend when something pressed on him. He was walking back to his horse when he heard his name, Mr. Mercer. The man who said it was standing at the edge of the boardwalk in a suit that had no business being in Millhaven, Utah. He was somewhere around 40, with a face built for delivering information without expression, and he had the unhurried posture of a man who had already won the conversation he was about to have. You have me at a disadvantage, Caleb said, stopping. My name is Dutch Calloway, the man said. I represent Victor Garrett. I know who you represent, Caleb said. Your employer filed a report against a woman who is currently a guest on my property. I'd say that makes your presence in my town something I have an interest in. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. Dutch clasped his hands in front of him, easy patient. Mr. Garrett is not an unreasonable man. He has considerable resources and considerable influence, but he prefers quiet resolutions over public ones. The woman in your house has property belonging to Mr. Garrett, documents specifically that she removed without authorization. Return the documents, separate yourself from this situation, and Mr. Garrett is prepared to let the matter in the sheriff's report simply expire. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. You're asking me to hand her over. I'm asking you to be practical, Dutch said pleasantly. And if I decline to be practical, something shifted very slightly behind Dutch's eyes. Not anger. Calculation. Then Mr. Garrett will proceed with the legal complaint. Your name, as you may already be aware, appears in our documentation as a known associate of Miss Whitfield. That kind of association carries consequences in a community like this one. Property value, credit standing, the way a man's neighbors look at him when he rides into town. He paused. You've built something here, Mr. Mercer. It would be a shame to see it complicated by someone else's problems. It was a threat dressed in the clothes of concern, and it was delivered with the practiced smoothness of a man who had made similar offers many times before. Caleb recognized it for exactly what it was, because he had spent enough years in honest work to know what dishonest work sounded like when it was trying to pass. "Mr. Calloway," Caleb said. His voice hadn't changed in pitch or pace, but something in it had gone quiet in a way that was not peaceful. "I've been on this land for 23 years. I have buried my wife on it. I have worked every acre of it by hand. And in all that time, not one man has told me what to do with my own property or who I will and will not shelter under my own roof." He picked up his reins. "If Mr. Garrett wants to file a legal complaint, he is welcome to do that. I'll be ready for him. Good day." He mounted and rode without looking back. But he was thinking hard the whole 14 miles home, and what he was thinking was that Dutch Calloway had come to him directly rather than going back to the sheriff, which meant the legal route wasn't as clean for Garrett as he was pretending. Which meant those documents in Clara's envelope were more dangerous to Garrett than the $11,000 story had made them seem. Which meant they had something real. He came through the door and found Clara at the table with 4 pages of close, careful handwriting in front of her, and the rifle exactly where he'd left it. "Dutch Calloway came to see me in town," he said. She went still. "He offered to make the sheriff's report go away if I hand you over and return the documents." He hung his coat. "I declined." She stared at him. "Caleb, I also sent 2 wires, one to the placement agency, one to a lawyer in Salt Lake who owes me nothing but is honest, which is the quality I need most right now." He sat down across from her. "Tell me what you know about what's in those documents that makes them worth Garrett sending a man all the way to Utah to negotiate in person rather than just filing the complaint." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There are 3 names in those transfer records that don't belong to clients of the firm." "Whose names?" "A judge," she said, "a city alderman, and a federal land assessor based in Salt Lake City." The room got very still. "The transfers to those names," she continued, "are formatted as legal retainers. They look like routine payments. But the amounts, the timing, and the accounts they originate from, they're bribes, Caleb. Documented bribes. Not just to protect Garrett's money scheme, to protect something else." "What else?" "I don't know," she said. "That's the honest answer. I know what those payments are. I don't know what they were buying." She pressed her hands flat on the table. "But a federal land assessor in Salt Lake City receiving payments from a Chicago businessman has very limited innocent explanations." Caleb sat back. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about a man in a good suit offering quiet resolutions in a town where he had no business being, and about a forged letter using his name and address, and about a federal land assessor. "He's after land," Caleb said. "That's what I think," Clara said. "My land specifically, or, I don't know," she said again. "Maybe yours. Maybe the whole valley. Maybe he needed you specifically because your deed is clean and uncontested, and your property sits somewhere he needs access to." She looked at him. "I'm sorry. I walked into your house not knowing I was carrying something this large." "You didn't walk in," he said. "You were aimed here. That doesn't make it less your problem." "No," he said. "It doesn't." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that surprised both of them. "My wife is buried at the north end of this property, 30 feet from a creek she loved. I have not let anyone tell me what to do with this land since the day I put her there, and I am not about to start because a man in Chicago thinks he can use a forged letter and a good suit to take it from me." He picked up the handwritten pages she'd completed. "Is this everything?" "Everything I know," she said. He read through it carefully. She watched him read. There was something in his face when he concentrated, a kind of absolute stillness that she found herself studying without meaning to. He was not a handsome man in the way that word usually got applied. He was something more durable than that. Something that had been tested and had held. "There's a woman in town named Margaret Alcott," he said without looking up. "She runs the dry goods store with her husband. She also sits on the county records committee and has for 12 years. She is the kind of person who notices when documents don't match." He set the pages down. I want her to look at your statement and the copies you brought before anything official happens." "You trust her?" Clara asked. "I trust her more than I trust anyone who's received a visit from Dutch Calloway," he said. "We'll go tomorrow morning, together." "Together," she repeated. He looked up then. "You're not a prisoner here. You're not obligated to—" "I know," she said. "I meant you'd be seen with me. Publicly. After the report." "I've been seen with worse reputations than yours," he said flatly. "And yours isn't real." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something between surprised and something older than surprise. Something that looked almost like being seen for the first time in a long while. She looked down at the table. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow." That night, Caleb sat up later than usual. He wasn't anxious exactly. Anxiety was a thing that required hope, and he was operating somewhere to the left of hope in the territory of sheer stubborn intention. He was planning. Running through what he knew, what he didn't know, what Garrett likely knew, and what he didn't. The fire had burned low when he heard her door open. He didn't move. He heard her walk to the kitchen, heard water being poured, heard a long silence. Then she appeared in the doorway, glass in hand, and stopped when she saw he was still in the chair. "I didn't know you were still up," she said. "Go back to bed," he said. Not unkindly. "I don't sleep well in unfamiliar places," she said. She came in and sat down, not in the chair directly across from him, but one to the side, like she was being careful with the distance. "Is that why you're still up?" "I don't sleep well in general," he said. She looked at the low fire. "How long has it been like that?" He knew what she was asking. He considered not answering. 16 years, he said. She nodded slowly like she'd expected the number. What was she like? It was a question nobody asked him anymore. People in Millhaven had stopped asking years ago the way people stop picking up something heavy after they've dropped it enough times. He found himself unexpectedly not minding it from her. "Practical," he said. "Funny in a way that snuck up on you. She could fix a fence post better than most men, and she made a terrible pie, and she knew it, and kept making it anyway, because she said the trying mattered more than the result." He stopped. "She would have liked you." Clara looked at him. "Why?" "Because you walked 4 miles in bad boots and didn't mention it once," he said. "She had a particular respect for people who just got on with things." The fire crackled. Outside, nothing moved. "Victor Garrett," Clara said after a moment. "He told me once that he'd built everything he had by understanding what people needed and finding a way to make himself into it." She paused. "He was very good at that, at reading people, at presenting himself as exactly what would earn their trust." She turned the glass in her hands. "I trusted him. For almost a year I trusted him. And I keep asking myself how I didn't see it, and the honest answer is that I did see it small things early, and I chose to interpret them charitably because he had been kind to me when I needed kindness, and I wanted to believe the kindness was real." "It might have been real," Caleb said. "People can be genuinely kind and still use that kindness as a tool." She looked at him like that had not occurred to her, and he could see it landing, resettling something in how she'd been carrying the question. "That's a hard thing to believe," she said. "Most true things are," he said. She was quiet for a while. Then, "Thank you for not sending me away this morning, for going back to town this afternoon, for—" She stopped. "For treating this like your problem when it isn't." "It has my name on the letter," he said. "That's not why you're doing it," she said. He didn't answer that. He reached forward and added the last log to the fire. "Go get some sleep," he said. "We ride at first light." She stood. She started toward the door and then stopped. "Caleb?" She didn't turn around. "Dutch Calloway didn't come to you to negotiate. Men like Garrett don't negotiate. He came to see how much you knew. And now Garrett knows that you know." Caleb looked at the fire. "I know," he said quietly. "So tomorrow changes things," she said. "Whatever we do tomorrow changes things, because after tomorrow he can't wait anymore. The fire popped. The house was very still. "Go to sleep, Clara," Caleb said. She went. He sat alone in the chair and thought about what she'd said, and about Dutch Calloway writing in that hotel room, and about a federal land assessor in Salt Lake City who had received money he shouldn't have. He thought about Sarah's grave at the north end of the property, and about how a man builds a wall around his grief, and calls it a life, and goes on living inside it year after year until one morning a woman shows up at his gate with the wrong letter and the right eyes, and the whole wall starts making a different sound. He told himself he wasn't thinking about that. He sat with the dying fire until it went dark, and then he went to bed, and this time, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, he did not lie awake counting the silence. He slept, and in the morning, the real fight was about to begin. They rode into Mill Haven before the town had fully woken up, and Caleb kept his eyes moving the whole way without making it obvious that he was keeping his eyes moving. Clara rode beside him without speaking, which he had already come to understand was her way. She didn't fill silence with noise. She let it stay until there was something worth putting in it. He respected that more than he could have explained. Margaret Alcott had the dry goods store open early, the way she always did, because Margaret believed that a business that made people wait was a business that made people reconsider. She was 63 years old, built like a woman who had never once asked for help carrying something heavy, and she had a mind that cataloged details the way a filing cabinet cataloged paper permanently and in exactly the right order. She looked at Clara when they came through the door, and she looked at Caleb and she said, "I heard you had company," in a tone that was neither judgmental nor particularly surprised. "I need you to look at some documents," Caleb said. "I heard that too," Margaret said. "Dutch Calloway had coffee in here yesterday afternoon and talked for about 20 minutes about a missing woman and stolen funds and your supposed involvement." She pulled her reading glasses from her apron pocket. "He's a very polished talker. Reminded me of every salesman who ever tried to sell me something I already knew I didn't want." She looked at Clara directly. "You're the woman." "Clara Whitfield," Clara said. "Yes." "Sit down, both of you," Margaret said. "Show me what you've got." Clara laid the documents on the counter, and Margaret went through them the way a person reads something they intend to remember, slowly, completely turning pages with the flat of her hand rather than a fingertip, reading footers and headers and case notations that most people would skip. She did not speak while she read. Caleb did not interrupt. Clara sat with her hands folded and let the woman work. After 12 minutes, Margaret set the last page down and took her glasses off and said, "The case number in the lower corner of this letter matches a format used by a private correspondence firm in Denver, not a placement agency. I know this because my niece worked for a legitimate placement agency for 4 years, and their case numbers carry a regional prefix that starts with RM. This one starts with GC. She tapped the letter. GC is the prefix used by Garrett Correspondence Services, which is a private document forwarding business registered in Illinois. I know this because 6 months ago I received a suspicious circular from that same firm, and I reported it to the county clerk." Caleb and Clara looked at each other. "He didn't use an outside agency," Clara said almost to herself. "He used his own company, which means every record of this letter, every copy, every log exists inside a business he controls. Except," Margaret said, "for the report I filed with the county clerk 6 months ago, which is a public record, which references GC's operational registration number." She folded her glasses. "Which means we can prove that firm belongs to Garrett. And if we can prove that we can prove the letter didn't come from any legitimate placement service." "We can prove the whole setup," Caleb said. "You can prove the letter was fraudulent," Margaret said precisely. "The rest will take more. But yes, that's your first brick." She looked at Caleb over the counter. "Dutch Calloway also asked me very casually whether I knew anything about the deed status of your north and northeast parcels." Everything in Caleb went quiet. "He asked about my deed. He asked whether there had been any recent assessments, whether there were any unresolved boundary disputes, whether the county had received any petitions regarding eminent domain considerations along the ridgeline." She said it steadily, watching his face. Clara made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Eminent domain, Caleb said. The words came out flat as stone. That's federal territory, Margaret said. County can't touch it. But a federal land assessor could initiate a review, and if someone with influence had already greased the right wheels. The payments, Clara said sharply. She turned to Caleb. The federal land assessor in Salt Lake. The payments in the transfer records. That's what they were buying. Not protection for the money scheme. A land assessment review. Garrett wants your property, and he needed a federal officer to create the legal mechanism to take it. Caleb stood very still for a moment. The particular stillness of a man who has just understood something that reorders everything he thought he knew. He doesn't just want to discredit you, he said slowly. He needed you out of Chicago because you found the records. But the reason those records exist, the reason he was moving money through that firm in the first place was to fund a land acquisition operation here. And your name was on the letter, Clara said, because a man who is voluntarily corresponding with a placement agency is a man establishing a paper trail of normal civilian behavior. It makes you look cooperative, unsuspecting. It creates a record that you were in contact with the agency, which puts you near her, which gives him a reason to involve you and your land in whatever legal proceeding he's planning. He was going to use the scandal around you, Caleb said, to muddy my deed. A rancher harboring a fugitive from a fraud case, Clara said. An active legal complaint. Questions about the character of the landowner. And meanwhile, a federal assessor with a reason to look at your property suddenly finds cause for a review. She pressed her hands on the counter. Caleb, I think your land is what this was always about. I was just the tool he used to get his hands close enough to reach it. Margaret Alcott had been listening to all of this with the expression of someone taking very careful notes in their head. What's on that north parcel? She said to Caleb. He was already thinking it. Creek access, he said. My property is the only private land between the federal grazing territory and the Valley Road. Whoever owns my north parcel controls water rights for 3 surrounding ranches and freight access to the mountain pass. How much would that be worth to a Chicago businessman with friends in federal land management? Margaret asked. Caleb looked at her. Enough, he said, to forge a letter, manufacture a fraud case, and send a man in a good suit to a mountain town to negotiate in private before anyone gets a clear look at the real picture. The store was quiet for a moment. Then the bell above the door rang and all 3 of them turned. It was Sheriff Dale Pruitt. He was a big man, not unkind with the look of someone who had not slept well and was already unhappy about what the morning had delivered. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Clara. He looked at Margaret. Well, he said, I had a feeling this is where I'd find everybody. Dale, Caleb said. Caleb. The sheriff came in and took his hat off, a courtesy he always paid Margaret without being asked. Miss Whitfield, I'm going to be direct with you because I prefer direct. Mr. Calloway came to my office this morning with a signed affidavit from a notary in Chicago and a formal extradition request initiating document. He held it up. It's not a warrant yet, but it's pointed in that direction. How long before it becomes one? Caleb asked. If it goes to a territorial judge without being contested, maybe 4 days, Pruitt said. If it gets contested, longer, but contested means a filing, and a filing means it becomes public record, Clara said, and Garrett wants a quiet resolution. Pruitt looked at her. Calloway made that fairly clear, yes. Sheriff, Clara said. She stood up straight and looked at him the way she looked at everything, directly, without flinching, without performing anything she didn't mean. I am going to tell you something, and I am going to ask you to hold it alongside what Mr. Calloway told you, and I am going to trust you to weigh them both honestly. That is all I'm asking. Pruitt looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair that Caleb had been sitting in and sat down. Go ahead, he said. She told him. All of it. The documents, the transfers, the 3 names, the judge, the alderman, the federal assessor. The GC correspondence firm. The eminent domain language Dutch Calloway had used with Margaret. She laid it out in order clearly without embellishment, and she watched his face the whole time because she had learned that the face tells you faster than words whether a person is hearing you or just waiting for you to finish. Pruitt was hearing her. When she finished, he sat for a long moment. Then he picked up one of the transfer documents and looked at it. "The federal assessor's name," he said. "In these records." "Harlan Voss," Clara said. Pruitt set the paper down very carefully. "Harlan Voss was in Millhaven 10 days ago," he said. "I assumed it was a routine water rights review for the Denny property on the east side." The room got very tight. "Was it?" Caleb said. "He spent 2 days," Pruitt said slowly. "He asked a lot of questions about the ridgeline. I thought—" He stopped. He put his hand flat on the table, the way a man does when he's rereading something in his memory, and finding that it says something different than he thought. "He asked me directly whether you had any active disputes on your north parcel, Caleb. I told him no. He seemed disappointed, and I remember thinking that was an odd reaction, but I didn't follow it. He was looking for a crack in the deed," Clara said. "Any disputed boundary, any lapsed filing, anything he could put a lever into." "There isn't one," Caleb said. "No," Pruitt agreed. "But that won't stop Garrett from creating the appearance of one if he can get Voss to file a preliminary review request, which he can if Voss is already paid." He stood up. "I need to send a wire to the Territorial Marshal's office, today, before Calloway gets wind that I'm moving on this. If you send that wire," Caleb said, "Calloway will know within the hour. He has someone watching the telegraph office. I'd bet my north parcel on it." "Then we go around the telegraph office," Margaret said. Both men looked at her. "My cousin Ellen runs a boarding house in Cedar Falls," she said matter-of-factly. "Cedar Falls has a telegraph office that Calloway has no reason to be watching. I can have my husband ride there this morning. It's a 2-hour ride." "Margaret," Pruitt said carefully. "Dale," she said in exactly the same tone, which meant she had already decided, and the conversation about it was brief. Pruitt looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at him. Something passed between them, the look of two men who had known each other long enough to trust each other without needing a speech about it. "All right," Pruitt said. "I'll write the wire myself. Henry can carry it." He picked up his hat and pointed at Caleb. "In the meantime, I want you and Miss Whitfield back at your ranch and not visible in town. If Calloway sees me talking to you and then rides hard out of Millhaven, we lose the time we need." "How much time is that?" Clara asked. "If Henry makes it to Cedar Falls by noon, and the marshal's office responds by end of day, maybe 24 hours before we have federal eyes on Voss." He paused. "That's a long 24 hours. "We've lasted longer," Caleb said. They rode back without speaking for the first mile, and then Clara said, "The sheriff believes me." "Yes," Caleb said. "I didn't expect that," she said. "Dale Pruitt has been a fair man his entire career," Caleb said. "He doesn't enjoy being used any more than I do. Finding out that Calloway came into his office with a manufactured complaint was not going to sit well with him." "What if Calloway already knows?" she said. "What if he has someone inside the sheriff's office?" "Then we find that out today," Caleb said, "and we deal with it." She looked at him from the side. "You say that like it's simple." "It's not simple," he said. "But complicated problems still only come at you one at a time. You deal with the one in front of you, and then the next one, and then the next one. That's all there is." She was quiet for a moment. 16 years of that," she said softly. He didn't answer, but she was not wrong. They were within sight of the ranch when he saw a horse tied at his fence post. Not Dutch Calloway's horse, a different horse, smaller, dark bay with trail dust on its flanks that said it had been ridden a long way without stopping. Caleb slowed. Clara saw it at the same time and went quiet beside him. "Someone's been inside," she said. The front door was ajar. "Stay back," he said. "Absolutely not," she said, and moved with him. They came through this door together and found a man sitting at Caleb's kitchen table. He was young, late 20s, with the look of someone who hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days and was trying not to show it. He had both hands on the table visible, which Caleb recognized as the gesture of a man who did not want to be misread. "Mr. Mercer," the young man said. "My name is Thomas Avery. I'm a junior clerk with the law firm of Aldrich & Cole in Chicago. He paused. I was Edwin Cole's personal assistant. Clara made a sound that stopped Caleb's hand halfway to his rifle. Edwin Cole is the attorney Clara went to, she said. Her voice had changed entirely. The one who had Garrett's name on his wall. Thomas Avery nodded. Mr. Cole is dead, he said. He died 11 days ago. It was reported as a heart failure. He looked at the table. It was not a heart failure. The kitchen was completely silent. You know this how? Caleb said. Because I was in the office that night, Thomas said. I came back to retrieve a file I'd forgotten. I heard two voices. I heard Mr. Cole say... He stopped, swallowed, started again. I heard Mr. Cole say that he had made a copy of documents he wasn't supposed to have seen, that he intended to bring them to a federal circuit judge in the morning, and I heard another voice. A voice I know because I've heard it in that office 100 times. Tell him that would be a significant error in judgment. He looked up. The next morning, the police said he died in his sleep. His office had been cleaned overnight. Whose voice? Clara said. Her voice was absolutely steady, the kind of steady that costs something to maintain. Thomas looked at her. It wasn't Garrett, he said. Garrett wasn't in Chicago that night. I checked his hotel records afterward. He was in Denver. He paused. The voice was Harland Voss. The name dropped into the room like a stone into deep water. The federal assessor, Caleb said. Voss and Garrett have been operating together for at least 4 years, Thomas said. I found the connection in the billing records after Mr. Cole died. Garrett moves the money. Voss provides the federal access. They've done this in 3 other states, identified land with strategic value, used legal and financial pressure to remove the current owners, and transferred the deeds through a shell property company registered in Nevada. He reached into his coat and put a folded envelope on the table. I copied what I could before they cleaned the office. It's not complete, but it has Voss's signature on 2 wire transfers that can't be explained by any legitimate federal salary. Clara sat down. She did not do it dramatically. She simply sat down because the weight of what she was hearing required it. You rode here from Chicago, Caleb said. I rode from Denver, Thomas said. I followed the wire trail from Garrett's Denver office to a telegram sent to Callaway 3 days ago. The telegram said the woman had been found and was secured, and that the rancher was cooperating with the containment plan. He looked at Caleb. That's what they called it. The containment plan. You were supposed to hand her over and stay quiet. I wasn't informed of my role in the plan, Caleb said. No, Thomas said. You weren't. Clara picked up the envelope. She opened it and spread the pages and looked at them with the eye of someone who had spent 4 years reading documents for a living. Her expression didn't change on the surface, but underneath it, something was moving fast. Caleb watched her read and waited. Thomas, she said without looking up. The circuit court in Salt Lake. Do you know which Judge Garrett's payment records are connected to? Thomas hesitated. Then he said, Judge Emmett Bray. Clara closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, then opened them. Emmett Bray is the judge the Territorial Marshal's office would most likely refer a complaint to, she said. Which means if Sheriff Pruitt's wire reaches the marshal and the marshal routes it through standard channels to the nearest circuit judge, it lands on Garrett's desk before it lands on anyone else's, Caleb finished. Caleb, we have to stop that wire, Clara said. She stood up fast. We have to stop it before Henry reaches Cedar Falls. Caleb was already moving for his coat. Thomas stood too. Mr. Mercer, there's one more thing. He said it quietly, the way a person says something they have been holding back because they needed to find the right moment and have just run out of time to look for it. The telegram Callaway sent to Garrett 3 days ago, the one I told you about it, had a second line I didn't mention yet. Caleb stopped, turned. It said, Thomas continued carefully. Property survey initiated. Deed challenge filed under Federal Review Code 7 with Voss's office. Timetable confirmed, 48 hours. Caleb looked at him. That telegram was sent 3 days ago, Thomas said. 48 hours. 3 days ago. The deed challenge wasn't coming. It was already filed. It had already been filed for 24 hours. Garrett had not been waiting to see how the situation played out. He had moved the moment Clara arrived at the ranch. The negotiation, port disappear, all of it had been a distraction. Something to keep Caleb and Clara looking at the wrong hand while the right one signed the papers that could take everything he owned. Caleb put his hat on. His voice when he spoke was completely level, which was the most dangerous version of his voice. "How long do we have before a federal review becomes a federal action?" Thomas said. 24 hours, maybe less. Caleb looked at Clara. Clara looked at Caleb. In that look was something that had been building for 2 days, something that had started the moment she'd stood at his gate with a letter he'd never written, something that neither of them had named because there hadn't been time, and there still wasn't time, but it was there. "Then we move now," Caleb said. Caleb rode hard, and he rode with purpose, which were two different things. A man riding hard is just moving fast. A man riding with purpose knows exactly where the fast is taking him and what he intends to do when he gets there. He had 24 hours, maybe less, before a federal review code became a federal action, and a federal action on a deed challenge meant Garrett's name replaced his on the land registry. And once a name was on a registry, it took years and lawyers and money. Caleb did not have to get it back off. He knew this, the way a rancher knows it, which is in the gut, not from a book. Land is not abstract. Land is the thing under your feet. And someone was trying to take the thing under his feet while he was busy looking at the distraction they'd built to keep his eyes up. He wasn't looking up anymore. Clara rode on his left, and Thomas Avery rode behind, and Caleb spoke without turning his head. "Thomas, the deed challenge filing, what office does it go through?" "Federal Land Registry in Salt Lake," Thomas said. "Voss's office manages the Utah Territory filings. And Voss reports to the Regional Land Commissioner, a man named Arthur Delp." "Does Delp know what Voss has been doing?" Thomas hesitated a half-second too long. "I don't know," he said. "I don't have documents connecting Delp directly, but Voss has been operating out of that office for 6 years without a single complaint filed against him, which means either Delp is clean and unaware or Delp is neither," Clara said. "Yes," Thomas said quietly. Caleb processed that. If Delp was compromised, a wire to the Regional Land Commissioner's office was as good as a wire to Garrett himself. Which meant the only avenue that stayed clean was one that went above the regional level entirely. Federal Circuit, or Territorial Governor's Office. Both of which required documentation substantial enough that a busy official would stop and look rather than pass it down the chain to the exact people who had been paid to make it disappear. "What we have," Caleb said, "is not quite enough." "It's close," Clara said. "Close doesn't file an injunction," he said. "Close doesn't stop a federal review already in motion. We need Voss's own records, not copies of payments to him, his own operational filings, the internal review request he submitted under Code 7. "That's inside his office," Thomas said. "Where is Voss right now?" Clara asked. "Last I knew, he was moving between Cedar Falls and Salt Lake," Thomas said. "He would need to be in Salt Lake when the review period closes to certify the findings in person." "Salt Lake is 8 hours by horse," Caleb said. "6 if you push," Clara said. He looked at her. "You've ridden that route." "I rode it coming in," she said. "I was paying attention." He almost said something to that. He stopped himself. Now was not the time, but he filed at the fact of her paying attention to things other people walked past without seeing. Storing information that might matter later, moving through a hostile situation with the quiet intelligence of someone who had learned that survival lives in the details. They reached the ranch and were off the horses before the animals had fully stopped. Caleb went straight to his desk, the old roll top in the front room that had been Sarah's before it was his, and pulled out the land deed. Clean title registered in 1869. No encumbrances. No disputes witnessed by 2 men who had both been dead for 4 years, which meant there was no one alive to contest the witnessing except the county records. "Margaret has a copy of the county deed registration," he said. "That's protected. Even if Voss files a challenge, the county record stands independent of the federal registry, and a discrepancy between county and federal records triggers an automatic review hold. He looked at Clara. If we can get to Margaret before Calloway moves, and if Margaret files a formal discrepancy notice with the county clerk today. It buys time, Clara said. It buys time, he confirmed. Not a solution, but time is what we need to get the right documents to the right person above Voss's level. The territorial governor, Thomas said from the doorway. Both Caleb and Clara looked at him. Governor Hadley, Thomas said. I have a name. Someone in his office who has been trying to build a case against federal land irregularities for 2 years and has been blocked at every turn by the regional commissioner's office. He reached into his coat again. He had been carrying what amounted to a portable filing cabinet Caleb was beginning to realize, and pulled out a folded card. His name is James Rourke, Deputy Aide to the Governor for Land and Resource Affairs. Caleb took the card, looked at it. You've been working on this for a while, he said. Thomas looked at him steadily. Edwin Cole was a good man, he said. He was frightened, and he made the mistake of trying to negotiate with people who don't negotiate. But he was a good man. I've been building this since the morning they told me he had a heart failure. He paused. I am 26 years old, and I am the only person left who knows what I know. So yes, I have been working on it for a while. The room held that for a moment. Then Clara said, We need to get to James Rourke in the governor's office before Calloway figures out that we've found Thomas. Does Calloway know you're here? Caleb asked Thomas. He knows I left Denver, Thomas said. He won't know why until he talks to someone who saw me at the Denver telegraph office. That could be. He thought about it. This afternoon, this evening at the latest. Then we have until this afternoon, Clara said, and then the sound of a horse coming fast up the road made all three of them go quiet. Caleb had the rifle in his hand before the thought was fully formed. Clara moved to the side of the window without being told out of the line of sight from outside. Thomas pressed back against the wall with the instinct of a man who had been afraid for several weeks and had gotten good at making himself small. The horse stopped. A voice called out, Caleb, it's Dale Pruitt. I need to come in right now. Caleb put the rifle down. Come. Pruitt came through the door without taking his hat off this time, which told Caleb everything before the man said a word. Pruitt's face had the look of someone who had just discovered that the floor was not where he had understood the floor to be. Henry didn't make it to Cedar Falls, Pruitt said. Caleb went still. He made it to the edge of the Denny property and ran into Dutch Calloway and 2 other men on the road. Calloway was polite about it. He said he was just passing through. But Henry's horse threw a shoe, and Calloway offered to let one of his men ride back to town with Henry to the livery, and by the time Henry got another horse and got back out there, Calloway was gone. Pruitt's jaw was tight. The wire didn't get sent. Did Henry tell Calloway where he was going? Clara said. Henry's a good man, but he's not a careful liar, Pruitt said. If Calloway asked him directly, probably yes. Clara pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment. So, Calloway knows we're moving, she said. He knows we're trying to get information out. He'll move the timeline up, Caleb said. If he wasn't sure before whether we had enough to cause trouble, he's sure now, which means he goes back to Voss, and Voss accelerates the review filing. How fast can Voss move it? Pruitt asked. Fast enough, Thomas said from the corner. Pruitt registered Thomas for the first time, looked at Caleb. Who is this? Someone who has been building the case against Garrett and Voss from the inside for 3 months, Caleb said. His name is Thomas Avery. He was Edwin Cole's clerk. Edwin Cole, the Chicago attorney. Edwin Cole, who died 11 days ago of a heart failure. That wasn't a heart failure, Clara said. Mr. Avery witnessed the conversation that preceded it. Pruitt looked at Thomas for a long moment with the expression of a man rapidly revising a number of assumptions. Then he turned back to Caleb. I came because I have something you need to know before anything else happens, and I didn't want to be seen walking into my own office to say it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single folded sheet. Calloway came back to see me this morning, after Henry's wire didn't go. He brought a signed affidavit from Judge Emmett Bray in Salt Lake, authorizing him to take Miss Whitfield into custody pending extradition proceedings. Clara's breath caught, just slightly, just once. "That's not legal," Thomas said immediately. "A Chicago fraud case cannot be adjudicated by a Salt Lake Circuit judge. Jurisdiction doesn't extend—" "I know that," Pruitt said. "And I told Calloway I knew that. He said Judge Bray had received a federal referral that brought the case under territorial jurisdiction." He paused. "And that the referral had been filed by a federal assessor's office." "Voss," Clara said. "Voss." Pruitt confirmed. He used the land review filing to create a federal nexus, and then used the federal nexus to give Bray jurisdiction over the fraud case. He looked at Clara directly. "It's twisted, but it's structured well enough that I cannot arrest Calloway for trying to enforce it. I can delay. I can require proper documentation before I cooperate. But if Calloway comes back with that paperwork properly formatted, I will be legally required to bring you in." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Caleb said, "How long can you delay?" "Legitimately 24 hours. I can request verification from the territorial marshal. I can require an independent review of the jurisdictional referral. After 24 hours, if I still refuse, I'm obstructing a federal-linked proceeding and I lose my badge." He said it plainly, without drama, the way a man states the terms of his own sacrifice. "We're not going to let it come to that," Caleb said. "Then tell me what you need from me in the next 24 hours, Pruitt said. Caleb looked at Thomas. "You said James Rourke in the governor's office has been trying to build a case for 2 years. If we get him everything, your documents, Clara's copies, the GC correspondence firm connection, the Voss wire transfers, is that enough for him to act on?" Thomas thought about it carefully. Not fast, which Caleb respected. A man who thinks fast about something this important is a man who isn't thinking hard enough. "If I can speak to him directly," Thomas said finally. "Not through a wire, not through intermediary. Face to face with the documents in hand. Yes, I believe it's enough." "Salt Lake," Clara said. "You need to get to Salt Lake." "We need to get to Salt Lake," Caleb said. "Caleb," she started. "This is my land," he said. "These are my documents being forged, my deed being challenged, my name on the letter. I am going to Salt Lake." She looked at him for a moment. "Then I'm going too," she said. "Rourke doesn't know Thomas. He doesn't know you. But a woman who worked inside the firm that processed Garrett's fraudulent accounts, who copied the documents at personal risk, who ran from Chicago, and can speak to every line in those papers from direct experience. That's the witness that makes it real instead of theoretical." Caleb looked at her. He thought about 17 arguments against it and discarded every one of them because they were all wrong. She was right. She was the center of the story. She was the proof that had a face. "Sheriff," Caleb said, "I need you to do something that is technically outside your jurisdiction. You need me to not mention that Miss Whitfield left the territory voluntarily in the direction of Salt Lake," Pruitt said before Caleb could finish. "I can do that. I can also happen to not notice that Thomas Avery was ever on your property if the subject comes up." He put his hat back on. "I'm going to go back to my office and spend the next several hours losing paperwork. I suggest you leave before I'm finished losing it." He was out the door and on his horse inside of 90 seconds. Thomas was already gathering his documents. Clara went to her room and came back in 2 minutes with her traveling case repacked to exactly what was necessary, and nothing more. She had done this before, clearly the fast and ruthless packing of someone who had learned not to attach too much weight to objects. Caleb went to the fireplace and took the cash box from behind the stone. It wasn't a large amount. It was what a man who lived simply and spent little accumulated over years of not needing much. He split it 3 ways without counting out loud and handed portions to Clara and Thomas. "You might need it separately," he said, "if we get separated." Clara took the money without arguing, which again told him everything about who she was. A person who argues about receiving help in a crisis is a person performing independence. A person who accepts it and stores it and moves on is a person who actually has it. "There's a back route to the Valley Road," Caleb said. "Adds 40 minutes but doesn't pass through Millhaven. We take the back route." And if Calloway already has men on the valley road, Thomas said. Then we deal with that when we get there, Caleb said. One problem at a time. They rode hard for an hour without event, which Caleb did not trust. Quiet in a situation like this one was not the absence of danger. It was danger being patient. He was right. They were 3 miles from the valley junction when Thomas said, "Rider, left side, keeping pace." Caleb didn't turn. How far? 300 yards, moving parallel through the trees. One rider or more. I can only see one, Thomas said. That doesn't mean one. Clara had not looked toward the trees. She was looking forward, which was correct. Looking at a thing you've spotted tells the thing you've spotted it. If they were going to stop us, they'd have moved by now, she said quietly. They're tracking us. They want to know where we're going. Which means they don't know about Rourke, Caleb said. If they knew where we were headed, they wouldn't bother tracking. They'd just wire ahead and have someone waiting. Then we can't lead them to Salt Lake, Clara said. No, Caleb said. We can't. He thought for exactly 5 seconds. There's a stage relay station 2 miles east. Boyd Mackey runs it. He owes me a debt from 3 winters ago that he's never had the chance to repay. He kept his voice even, kept his body language unchanged, kept riding at the same pace. We ride to Boyd's. The rider tracking us expects us to keep heading south. When we go east, they'll have to choose between following and signaling ahead. And if they follow, Thomas said, Boyd's station has 3 hands and a freight yard with enough cover to lose a conversation in, Caleb said. We deal with it there. They turned east at the next fork without hurrying, without looking back, without giving the rider in the trees any visible reason to think the turn was tactical rather than routine. Caleb felt the change in the quality of the air that meant someone behind them was making a decision. He counted in his head. 1, 2, 3. They stopped, Thomas said. Still stopped? Yes. They're signaling, Clara said. Someone ahead. Ride, Caleb said. They pushed hard for Boyd's station and came through the freight yard gate with the horses breathing, and Boyd Mackey stepping out of the barn with the look of a man whose quiet afternoon had just become complicated. He was a broad-weathered man in his 50s with hands like work gloves and eyes that read a situation fast. Caleb, he said. He looked at Clara and Thomas. He looked at the horses. He looked at the road behind them. You need to come inside. We need horses, Caleb said. Fresh. 3 of them. I've got 2, Boyd said, and a freight wagon heading to Salt Lake at 4 o'clock that I can get you on if you explain yourself in less than 2 minutes. Caleb explained himself in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Boyd listened without interrupting, which was one of the qualities Caleb had always valued in him. When it was done, Boyd was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, and then said, Harland Voss came through this station 8 days ago. Stopped for water. Asked me how long the Mercer Ranch had been operating, and whether the family line was clear. He paused. I told him it wasn't my business to know other men's family lines and he should move on. He moved on. Another pause. Get in the wagon. I'll handle the horses. The freight wagon left at 4 o'clock with 3 passengers in the back and a load of supply crates that provided both cover and something to brace against on the mountain road. Boyd's driver was a young man named Cal, who asked no questions, which Boyd had presumably already arranged. Thomas organized his documents in the wagon bed by lamplight as the light outside went gray and then dark. Clara sat beside Caleb with her shoulder almost touching his, not quite the proximity, something neither of them addressed. After a long while, she said, What if Rourke doesn't believe us? He'll believe the documents, Caleb said. What if it's not enough to stop the filing before the 24 hours close? Then we find another way, he said. You always have another way. No, he said. Sometimes I just don't stop until I find one. That's different. She was quiet for a moment. Caleb? Her voice had changed, softer. The way a person's voice changes when they stop managing it and let it say what it actually means. I need you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we walk into in Salt Lake, I did not come to your door to bring this to you. I did not choose this for you. I know that, he said. I mean, I would not have if I had known. Clara. He said her name the way he said things he meant, flat and real and without decoration. You showed up at my gate 4 days ago. In 4 days you have identified a forged document, decoded a land fraud scheme, produced critical evidence ridden halfway across the territory, and have not once asked me to carry something you could carry yourself. He stopped. Let that sit for a moment. You didn't bring this to me. You brought yourself. And so far, that has been considerable. She didn't speak for a long time after that. When she did, her voice was very quiet. I forgot, she said, what it felt like to have someone. She stopped, started differently. I forgot that people could be like you. I'm not anything particular, he said. That's the most particular thing about you, she said. The wagon rolled on through the dark. Thomas fell asleep over his documents with the collapsed reliability of a man running on empty who had finally found a moment where falling asleep wouldn't get anyone killed. The road was rough and the night was cold, and Caleb sat with his shoulder now fully against Clara's because the road had jostled them there and neither of them moved away. He was not thinking about Sarah. He noticed that. Not with guilt, not with relief, just as a fact. He was thinking about the woman beside him and about what was waiting in Salt Lake, and about 24 hours that were already burning down. It was 2 a.m. when the wagon rolled into the edge of Salt Lake City, and the driver pulled up near a rooming house he knew that kept late hours, and the 3 of them climbed out stiff and cold and carrying everything they had. Caleb looked at the buildings around him, the lights still burning in a few windows the size of a city that operated at a scale his mountain life had made strange to him. And he thought James Rourke. Governor's aide. 2 years of a blocked case, and enough frustration to make a man receptive to someone walking through his door with the documents that could break it open. We go at first light, he said. First light, Clara agreed. Thomas was already studying a street sign, getting his bearings. Rourke's office is in the Territorial Building on West Temple, he said. It opens at 8. We'll be there at 7:59. Caleb said. They went inside. Caleb paid for 2 rooms without thinking about how that looked or what anyone would make of it because he had run out of room in his mind for things that weren't the central problem. He went to his room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the floor and thought about his land, about Sarah's grave at the north end 30 feet from the creek, the stone he had set himself with his own hands because he hadn't been able to afford a proper one for the first 2 years. And by the time he could, he had decided the one he'd made himself was better anyway. He thought about the letter with his name on it, about a man in Chicago who had looked at his isolation and seen not a man in grief, but a clean target, a man with land and no one to notice if the land changed hands. He thought about Clara's voice saying, I forgot what it felt like to have someone. He lay down without undressing. He was asleep in under 3 minutes. In the room next door, Clara sat with the documents spread on the bed and went through them one more time, checking every detail, every name, every date, every number. The way a person checks something they are about to stake everything on and wants to make absolutely certain they have not missed what they cannot afford to miss. She hadn't missed anything. She gathered the pages and held them in her hands and thought about what Caleb had said in the wagon. You brought yourself. And so far, that has been considerable. She turned those words over in her mind with the careful attention she gave to things that mattered, and they mattered in a way she did not entirely have language for yet, but that sat in her chest with the specific weight of something real. She put the documents back in the envelope. She lay down. She did not expect to sleep. She slept. And in the morning, before the sun had fully committed to the day, Caleb knocked twice on her door and said simply, time. And she was already dressed and ready when she opened it. What was waiting for them in the Territorial Building on West Temple Street would determine whether they walked out with everything or lost it all before noon. Both of them knew it. Neither of them said it. They walked. Part 5. Lưu ý viết 2.500 đến 3.200 từ. Liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề. Tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 5 đạt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lời AI. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính, không viết lan man. Kết thúc dùng câu khẳng định mạnh để khép lại câu chuyện rõ ràng, trọn vẹn. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mực document mới 2 đến 3 phút, cần có mini climax và đắt 10 đến 15. Mini climax, mỗi phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút, có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen, mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn, tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nhé. Show more 17 bon 18. Orchestrated final narrative arc, voi twist dialogue và emotional climax. Orchestrated final narrative arc, voi twist dialogue và emotional climax. James Rourke was not what Caleb had expected. He had expected someone polished, political, the kind of man who had learned to wear a desk job the way some men wore expensive suits, like armor, like distance. What he found instead was a lean man in his early 40s, with ink on his fingers and 3 open case files spread across a desk that looked like it had never once been tidy, who looked up when they came through his office door at 7:59 in the morning and said without preamble, "You're not my 8 o'clock." "No," Caleb said. "We're your 7:59. My name is Caleb Mercer. This is Clara Whitfield and Thomas Avery. We have documents connecting Harlan Voss to Victor Garrett and a federal land fraud operation that has been running for at least 4 years and is currently in the process of stealing my property through a Review Code 7 filing that was initiated 4 days ago." Rourke's pen stopped moving. He looked at Thomas. Something moved in his face. Recognition sharp and fast. "You were Edwin Cole's clerk," he said. "Yes," Thomas said. "Cole reached out to my office 8 months ago," Rourke said. "I sent back a request for documentation. He never responded." "He was frightened," Thomas said. "And then he was dead." Rourke set his pen down with the careful deliberateness of a man making a decision with his body before his mouth has caught up. "Close the door," he said. "Sit down. Show me everything you have. And do not leave anything out." They spent 40 minutes in that office. Clara laid the documents on his desk, in the order she had arranged them the night before. Not chronologically, but argumentatively. Each page building the case that the next page needed the previous one to stand. She had thought about this in the wagon. She had thought about what a man who had been trying to build this case for 2 years and kept hitting walls would need to see first to believe the walls were about to come down. Rourke read fast and read completely, the way a person reads who has been waiting for something for long enough that when it finally arrives, they are afraid to slow down in case it disappears. He asked 4 questions. All 4 were precise, specific, and demonstrated that he understood exactly what he was looking at. When he finished the last page, he sat back and looked at the ceiling for 10 seconds, which Caleb recognized as the look of a man doing rapid strategic calculation rather than stalling. "The Review Code 7 filing," Rourke said finally. "When does it close?" "We have maybe 12 hours, Clara said. "If we still have that. Voss has to certify the findings in person at the registry office," Rourke said. "If I can get a hold order on that certification before he walks through that door, the filing becomes void." He was already standing. "The hold order has to come from above the regional commissioner, which means it comes from this office, which means I need the governor's signature." He looked at Caleb. "Governor Hadley comes in at 8:30. "It's 8:42, Clara said. Rourke was already moving. "Stay here," he said. "Do not leave this office. Do not talk to anyone in the hallway. If someone knocks on that door and it isn't me, do not open it." He stopped in the doorway. "And if Harlan Voss somehow walks into this building before I come back..." He looked at Thomas. "You said you heard his voice the night Cole died." "Clearly," Thomas said. "I would know it anywhere." "Good," Rourke said. "Because I may need you to say that under oath before the morning is done." Then he was gone, moving fast down the hallway, with the purpose of a man who had been pointed at a target for 2 years and had finally been given a clear shot. The three of them sat in the office and waited. Caleb looked at his hands. Thomas organized the documents again, which was what he did when he was anxious. Clara sat straight in her chair and very still, the way she went still, when she was thinking hard and didn't want the thinking interrupted. After a moment, she said quietly, "The governor might say no." "He might," Caleb said. "If Garrett has reach inside the governor's office, then Rourke wouldn't have spent 2 years trying to build this case," Caleb said. "A man doesn't fight against something from inside it. He's clean." "You don't know that," she said. "No," he said. "But I've spent 23 years reading men, and the ones who are dirty don't have ink on their fingers at 8 in the morning. They have clean desks and practice smiles." He paused. "Rourke has neither." She almost smiled. It didn't quite get all the way there, but it was close. 19 minutes passed. Caleb counted them. Then the door opened and Rourke came back in with a sheet of paper in his hand and an expression that was not triumph. Triumph would have been too easy, too clean, but something closer to the focused intensity of a man who has just committed to a course he cannot reverse. "The governor signed it," he said. "Hold order on the Code 7 certification. Effective immediately. I'm sending a deputy to the registry office right now to file it before Voss can get there." He sat down and picked up his pen. "I'm also initiating a formal federal misconduct investigation against Harlan Voss based on the wire transfer documents. That goes to the Inspector General's office directly. It bypasses the regional commissioner entirely." "And Garrett?" Clara said. "Garrett is a civilian matter until we can establish federal nexus beyond the land fraud," Rourke said. "The bribery of a federal official gives us that nexus. Once Voss is under investigation, the payments connecting him to Garrett become federal evidence, and the whole structure comes down." He looked up at her. "The fraud charges against you in Chicago, the sheriff's report Calloway filed in Millhaven, those become part of the same federal case, which means a federal prosecutor supersedes the territorial complaint and the Chicago complaint both." Clara absorbed that. "He loses the weapon," she said. "He loses all of them," Rourke said. "At once." For the first time in 4 days, something in Clara's posture changed. Not collapse, not relief exactly, more like a structure that has been holding tremendous weight for a very long time, is finally allowed to acknowledge how heavy the weight was. It was a small change. Caleb noticed it because he had been watching her, which he had been doing more than he had admitted to himself. "There's still Dutch Calloway," Thomas said, "and whatever men Garrett has in Millhaven. The hold order on the deed challenge goes on public record the moment my deputy files it," Rourke said. "Calloway will know within the hour. A man like Calloway doesn't stay in a situation once the legal mechanism he was operating through collapses." He paused. "He'll be on a train by noon." "And Garrett himself," Caleb said. "Garrett will lawyer up the moment he hears from Calloway," Rourke said. "He's done this before. He's careful. But this time, he's left a trail that involves a federal official's death, and that is a category of problem that lawyers cannot make go away." He set down his pen. "I won't promise you a fast resolution. These things take time. But I will promise you that your land is protected as of this morning, that Miss Whitfield's name will be cleared through the federal case, and that Harlan Voss will not be certifying any land reviews in the territory of Utah for a very long time." Caleb nodded once. It was not the kind of nod that performs relief. It was the kind that confirms a calculation. The land was safe. That was the first thing. Everything else was architecture. Rourke looked at Thomas. "I'll need your formal statement. Today in writing, witnessed and notarized." "I'll give you whatever you need," Thomas said. "I came here to give you whatever you needed." "You rode a long way on a thin hope," Rourke said. Thomas thought about it. Edwin Cole was a good man, he said. The same as the first time he'd said it. But it landed differently in this room at this moment after everything, like a sentence that had been waiting for the right place to come to rest. Rourke looked at him for a moment with the kind of respect that doesn't announce itself. Then he went back to writing. They were in that office for 2 more hours. Caleb gave his statement. Clara gave hers in the careful and complete language of a woman who had been a legal secretary and knew exactly what made testimony useful versus what made it decorative. Thomas gave his last, and it was the longest, and when it was done, the notary who Rourke had called in looked at all 3 of them with the expression of someone who has just participated in something they will remember for the rest of their career. It was mid-morning when they finally came out of the territorial building into the open air. Thomas stopped on the steps and took a long breath. Then he said, "I think I'd like to sleep for about 4 days." "You've earned it," Clara said. He looked at her, then at Caleb. He put out his hand, and Caleb shook it firm and real. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I'm glad the letter was sent to you." Caleb looked at him. "I'm not sure glad is the word I'd use," he said. "But I'm not sorry either." Thomas smiled the first real smile Caleb had seen from him, and then he walked down the steps and into the street and hailed a passing cab. And that was the last they saw of him that day. This young man who had carried a dead mentor's cause across 3 states on borrowed time and insufficient sleep, and the particular stubbornness of someone who has decided that the thing is worth doing and is going to do it. Clara watched him go, then she looked at Caleb. "We should get the horses and ride back," she said. "Yes," he said. Neither of them moved immediately. "Your land is safe," she said. It was the first time she'd said it plainly as a statement rather than a goal. "Yes," he said again. "And the charges against me will be dropped," he said. Rourke was clear. She nodded slowly, looked at her hands briefly. "So there's no longer a legal reason for me to stay on your property," she said. It came out carefully the way she said things she was measuring. "The situation that put me there is resolved. Or being resolved." "That's true," he said. She looked at him. "Is that the only reason you let me stay?" It was a direct question. She had always asked direct questions. He had noticed that from the first morning. She did not circle. She did not imply and wait for you to find the implication. She asked because she had been in enough situations where not asking had cost her more than the discomfort of asking ever could. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "No." She waited. "When Sarah died," he said, "I decided that was the end of a particular kind of living. Not consciously. I didn't sit down and make a decision. I just stopped requiring it. The way you stop going to a room in your house after something happens there. You don't board it up. You just stop going." He stopped, started again. "In 4 days you walked into every room." Clara was very still. "I'm not asking anything of you," he said. "You have your life back. You have your name back. Chicago, or somewhere else, or wherever a person goes when they get to choose again, that's yours. I'm not putting any weight on this." "Caleb," she said, "I'm saying it plainly, so there's no confusion." "Caleb," she said again the same way, and something in how she said his name made him stop talking. She stepped forward, 1 step direct. No hesitation, the way she did everything, and she put her hand flat against his chest. Not a gesture of romance, not a performance, just contact. Just the simple human act of one person choosing to touch another person and meaning it. "I spent a year in a situation with a man who used my trust as a material," she said. "I know what that feels like. And I know what this feels like because this is the opposite of it." She looked up at him. "I'm not going to Chicago. I told you already I can't go back to Chicago. The charges will be cleared," he said. "Legally you could—" "I don't want to go back," she said. "There is nothing there I want. There is nothing there that wasn't contaminated by what Garrett did to it." She kept her hand where it was. "I am telling you that I want to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I have somewhere else to go." Rourke said himself that with the federal case, I could establish myself anywhere. I want to stay, because in 4 days, you made me feel like a person who is worth fighting for, and I have not felt that in so long. I had started to believe I never would again." Caleb put his hand over hers, his rough, large, work-worn hand over her smaller one that had done its own kind of hard work. He did not make a speech about it. He did not dress it in language it didn't need. He just held her hand against his chest and let that be what it was. "All right," he said. She exhaled. Just once, slow, the specific exhale of a person who has been holding their breath for longer than they realized. "All right," she said back. They rode back to Millhaven. It took most of the day, and they talked more on that ride than they had talked in all the previous days, combined, not about Garrett or Voss or documents or federal cases, but about smaller things, realer things, the texture of ordinary life that two people begin to share when they decide they are going to share it. She told him about growing up in a house full of sisters, about her father's garden, about the particular smell of a Chicago autumn that she had once loved and associated now with the beginning of the worst year of her life, and how she thought she might like to replace that association with something better if she had the time. He told her about the ranch in winter, about the way the mountain looked in January, when everything was hard and white and quiet, and somehow more itself than at any other time of year. He told her about the pie Sarah used to make badly on purpose, because she said the trying mattered more than the result, and Clara laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her unprepared, and said that was the most sensible philosophy she'd ever heard applied to baking. He had not heard a woman laugh in his kitchen in 16 years. He was already thinking about that. They came into Millhaven in the late afternoon, and Dale Pruitt was standing on the steps of his office like he had been watching the road. When he saw them, he came down the steps without rushing and walked to meet them and said, "Calloway's gone. Left on the noon stage with both his men. Didn't say a word to me, didn't file any additional paperwork, just settled his hotel bill and walked to the stage." He paused. "I assume that means something went right in Salt Lake." "The deed hold is filed," Caleb said. "Federal misconduct investigation on Voss. The fraud case against Clara is being superseded by federal proceedings." Pruitt looked at Clara. "Are you all right?" he said. It was the question of a decent man checking on a person who had been through something, not a formality. "Yes," she said, and she meant it in a way that was new. Not the stubborn yes of someone refusing to admit damage. The genuine yes of someone who has come through the far side of something and found the ground solid under their feet. "Good," Pruitt said. He looked at Caleb. "Margaret wants to see you. She said, and I'm quoting directly, that she expects you for supper tonight and that this is not a request." Caleb looked at Clara. "You should know that Margaret Alcott's suppers are not optional, and also not small." "I gathered that from our first meeting," Clara said. They went. Margaret's supper table had 4 extra chairs pulled up to it, and Margaret herself moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of a woman who had been feeding people through difficult circumstances her entire life and had never once found it insufficient as a response to trouble. Her husband Harold, a quiet man who expressed his feelings entirely through the size of the portions he served, gave Caleb a plate that said everything about how glad he was the thing had gone the way it went. At the table, Margaret looked at Clara over her coffee cup and said, "What are your plans if you don't mind being asked directly?" "I don't mind," Clara said. "I'm staying in Millhaven." Margaret looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at his plate. Margaret looked back at Clara with the expression of a woman who has all the information she needs and is choosing generously not to make a production of it. "Good," she said simply. "We could use another person on the records committee who knows what a forged document looks like." Clara looked at her. "Are you serious?" "I am never not serious," Margaret said. "We meet the first Thursday of every month. Harold makes coffee. It's not glamorous, but the work matters." It was the most ordinary possible offer made at the most ordinary possible supper table, and Clara received it with something that moved across her face before she could manage it, something that looked very much like coming home, which was remarkable, since she had never been to this town before 5 days ago and knew almost no one in it. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that very much." The evening went long. The way evenings go long when the danger has passed and the people at the table are beginning to understand tentatively what the ordinary is going to look like from here. When they finally rode back to the ranch, it was full dark and the stars were out in the way. They get out in the Utah mountains, not decorative, not background, but present and serious and very large. Caleb unhitched the horses and Clara helped without being asked the way she always helped. And when they were done and the barn was latched and they stood in the yard in the cold dark, Clara looked up and said, "Those are remarkable." "You get used to them," he said. "I hope I don't," she said. He looked at her profile against the dark. This woman who had walked up his road 5 days ago, carrying someone else's letter and her own formidable self, who had been aimed at his life like a weapon and had turned into something else entirely. Something he did not have a word for yet, but intended to have time to find. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly without taking my situation into account." "All right," she said. "Are you certain?" he said. "About staying. Not because the alternative is difficult, because this is what you choose." She looked at him for a long moment. The serious, clear-eyed, direct look that he had come to understand was her most honest face. "You fixed a fence this morning before we left for Salt Lake," she said. "The section by the north pasture. You stopped and fixed it, even though we were in a hurry, and it took 4 minutes, and it wasn't the most important thing on the list. The fence needed fixing," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the answer to your question." He understood her. A man who stops to fix the fence even when everything is on fire is a man who means to still be here when the fire is out. A man who tends the ordinary things in extraordinary circumstances is a man who intends the ordinary to last. "All right," he said, for the second time that day, in the same tone, meaning the same thing. She took his hand. Not the careful, deliberate gesture from the steps in Salt Lake. Just took it naturally, the way a person takes the hand of someone they have decided belongs to them, and walked with him toward the house. The months that followed were not simple. The federal case moved slowly the way federal cases do, grinding through depositions and subpoenas and counterfilings and the full institutional weight of a legal system that does not like to be hurried. Victor Garrett hired 4 lawyers, and they delayed everything they could delay. Harlan Voss was suspended from the federal assessor's office within 2 weeks and formally indicted 3 months later. Dutch Calloway was located in Denver and agreed to testify in exchange for reduced charges, which is to say that in the end, Victor Garrett was undone not by a dramatic confrontation, but by the small, practical betrayal of a man who had been paid to be loyal and decided the payment wasn't worth the risk. The fraud charges against Clara were formally dismissed on a Tuesday in November. Rourke sent a letter. Clara read it at the kitchen table and set it down and sat with it for a moment. And Caleb watched her from across the room and did not say anything, because there are moments that belong to a person privately, even when someone who loves them is standing in the same room. Then she folded the letter and looked up and said, "It's done." "Yes," he said. "Really done," she said. "Really done," he confirmed. She stood up and came across the kitchen and hugged him, which was something they had not quite done yet in the specific, uncomplicated way of it, arms around faces. Close the full human weight of another person's relief against your chest. He held her with his rough hands and felt her exhale the last of something she had been carrying since Chicago. And he thought that a house that has been empty for 16 years could fill up faster than a man expected if the right person walked into it. He had stopped counting words per day sometime in October. He had not noticed the exact moment it happened. He had just noticed one evening that he had stopped. Thomas Avery sent a letter in December. He had taken a position with a land reform advocacy group in Washington working on federal registry oversight legislation. He wrote in the careful, precise language of a man who had learned to make words do real work. And at the end, he wrote that Edwin Cole would have been pleased with how it ended, and that he thought Caleb and Clara were probably the 2 most stubborn people he had ever met, which he meant as the highest possible compliment. Clara read that part aloud at the table and laughed again, that surprised, genuine laugh. And Caleb thought there was no sound he liked better in the world, which was a thought that would have been impossible to him 2 years ago and was now simply true. In the spring, Clara stood at the north end of the property by the creek at the stone Caleb had set with his own hands, and she did not say anything, and he did not explain anything. And she reached out and touched the stone once, gently, the way you touch something that matters to someone you love. And that was all. On a Saturday in April, with Margaret Alcott and Dale Pruitt standing in the front room as witnesses, and Harold Alcott making coffee in the kitchen, because that was how he participated in important occasions. Caleb Mercer married Clara Whitfield on the ranch, where someone had tried to ruin both of them, and had failed completely on land that still carried his name, and always would in the house that had been silent for 16 years, and would never be silent in the same way again. When the short ceremony was done, Margaret said, "Well, it's about time," which was generous of her since the whole thing had taken less than 2 weeks of acquaintance to become inevitable. Caleb looked at his wife. His wife, a word he had not used in 16 years, and that fit now, the way a thing fits when it is exactly right. And Clara looked at him with her clear, direct, honest eyes, and what passed between them in that look was not sentiment, was not performance, was the simple, solid recognition of two people who had come through something hard and chosen each other on the other side of it with full knowledge of the cost. Some loves begin in easy weather. This one had begun in a forged letter and a mountain road and a gate that a woman with bad boots and a borrowed case had refused to walk away from. It had been tested before it was named proven, before it was spoken, and built on a foundation of practical courage and honest work, which is the only foundation that holds. Caleb Mercer had not needed anything or anyone for 16 years. Then Clara Whitfield arrived by mistake and stayed by choice. And the mistake turned out to be the best thing that had ever found its way to his door. Some things that look like accidents are just the truth, arriving by an unexpected road.